Awesome. Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is going to be an exciting discussion for sure. I know this invite went out to all of Town Square Media Enterprise, and I'm not sure if everybody knows who I am. My name is Tim Perrone, and I'm the president of Town Square Interactive and Town Square Ignite. I'm super excited today to be able to do two things. Number one, to kick off this discussion, and number two, to be a participant in the audience to hear the things that are going to be discussed on the call. We're all aware of what's happening in the country today as it relates to social injustices and social unrest, and I couldn't be prouder to work for a company that takes the stance that feels that bias and discrimination have no place in our society. Today I'm here, as many of you are, to become more educated on this topic so that we can better support our Black friends, our colleagues, and our employees. There's two people going to be on this discussion today, and I'm going to go through some brief introductions, so don't shame me for reading from my notes, because I want to make sure it's accurate. A moderator for today's discussion is Dean Thompson. Dean is a digital marketing specialist for Town Square Interactive, and he's been with us for just over a year now. Dean is a 2015 graduate of Wingate University, where he served as both vice president and president of the Black Student Union. During his tenure as president in the organization, they led a number of events aimed at educating people about Black culture and the issues African Americans face in our society today. He also had the privilege of serving as a Men of Valor mentor for 2 years, helping minority students graduate high school. Dean also received the A.F. Hendricks Award, which is presented annually to the graduating senior man who represents the ideals of scholarship, leadership, and service. Also on the call today is leading us to our esteemed guest, Dr. Lyndon Abrams. Dr. Abrams, again, I thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Super important and much appreciated. Dr. Abrams is the associate professor in the Department of Counseling at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He coordinates the department's doctoral program and teaches courses in the areas of counseling theory and multicultural counseling. He is the recipient of the university's Bonnie E. Cone Distinguished Professorship for Teaching. He also received the College of Education Award for Excellence in Teaching. And Dr. Abrams' interests include racial identity development, social desirability responding, efforts to increase the participation of underrepresented groups in STEM career fields, and efforts to reduce violence amongst young people. Formerly, Dr. Abrams served as a counselor working with college students and emotionally and behavioral challenged adolescents. This is going to be an amazing call. I'm super excited. I've had the chance to touch base with both these fine men, and I'm very, very anxious to get this started. But before I do, I would like to give a special thanks to Emily Gomez, Dean Thompson, Dr. Abrams, the Town Square IT team, and Heather Hager for making this call possible. We appreciate it. And Dean, I'm going to turn it over to you. Unmute yourself, Dean.
Oh, man. Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate that fine introduction, and thank you all for being here on this call today on this very monumental day, Juneteenth. And if you don't know about Juneteenth, I'm sure that you've seen a lot of social media posts go out today. And so the purpose for this call, the purpose for this event today is just to educate and talk about the issues facing the African American, African Americans today. And so really thankful to have my friend, Dr. Abrams here. I know him personally, great family friend. And so we're just going to get started. Just have some questions, and we're just going to have a discussion about the events that are going on in our society today and how companies can best support their employees during these uncertain times and even in the future. So, Dr. Abrams.
How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I hope you are.
Let me say thanks, Tim, for those kind words, and thanks for the invitation to come and hang out with you guys. This is a neat opportunity. I didn't know the enormity of it until I began to look at Town Square Media and what a big deal you guys really are. So, so I feel honored.
Thank you so much for that. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Tell us a little bit about your experience as a Black educator and what led you to pursue a career in multicultural studies.
Wow, I grew up in Sumter, South Carolina. Okay, now that's an interesting notion in and of itself. And my first year in school was the first year of desegregated schools in Sumter County. And so I started with a bang. The good thing was that I grew up near an or rather an Air Force base where I grew up with a bunch of Air Force brats. And what that really means is my friends came from all over the United States and many parts of the world. I mean, there were folks from Incirlik, Turkey, and France, and Berlin, Germany, and Guam, and they brought in this potpourri of culture. And so while I lived in this time where there was a lot of strife, there was also this oasis of people who were used to getting along well together. And I think that colored my experience and gave me a contrast of what the world is and what the world can be. And so that those things kind of stuck with me. As I got older and got into education, I got into this notion of wanting to understand why some folks were successful and some folks weren't, and what we could do about it, particularly around cultural issues and identity development, which was mentioned. You know, how do those things relate to one's success in the world? That put me in multicultural studies, and often the for lack of a better term, the different person gets assigned to work in the cultural studies area. You know, well, you fit the description, so you should teach these courses. Well, sometimes that's not good because it becomes only the concern of those folks who are the underrepresented group. And so that's a problem. But I love this work, and I love having these conversations, even at times when it's frightening for people, because I see what comes out of it when we do. It's certainly helpful to the individuals involved, but in a corporate setting, it's essential to effective growth, effective development, effective everything that corporations and businesses do. When you have good community, when you have a good climate, then the world is a better place for everybody involved.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you on that, man. And so speaking of the climate, you know, things are really, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, crazy. There's a lot of emotions going on right now, you know, in part due to the George Floyd situation, the George Floyd killing, if you will, and also the Ahmaud Arbery shooting and Breonna Taylor, and there's been a number of events since George Floyd shooting. We've seen reports of you know, African Americans being hanged, one in California, and also we saw, you know, news stories about a police shooting in Atlanta. So there's a lot going on, a lot of emotions. But give us your take on the George Floyd situation, particularly.
You know, George Floyd was one individual, but the fact that his death was videotaped and broadcast to the world in the manner that it was really made police brutality in African American communities a very salient event. You can't look away. You can't unring that bell. You can't not hear and be reminded of what you saw once you've seen and internalized that. And so his death is really emblematic of a larger set of circumstances that we need to come to terms with here in America. And America tends to be people of good intent. Most folks are good people, but often we don't attend to the things that aren't salient to us. That is, we don't attend to the things that aren't in our face.
Right.
The notion of what we saw on video with George Floyd and the careless disregard for life really amplified concerns that exist for for many in our population on a day-to-day basis. You know, it's sort of like, well, I'm not surprised, except that it was caught on video.
Right.
I mean, we've seen this before. We saw this in the 90s. We've seen sporadic videos here and there, and the notion that it's overblown. We made too much of these things. That's I think that is called into question with what we see.
Okay. I definitely agree with you on that one as well. And we know that this is not a new issue, right? No. This is something that has been going on for centuries. And the fact that everybody and their grandma, it seems like, has a cell phone, these things are put more out in the forefront, and it's causing people to really have to face these issues head on. Like, you can't hide from it, like you said. And speaking of, not hiding from it and responding to it, we've seen a lot of businesses and corporations speak out and offer assistance to the Black community in response to these events, such as George Floyd's death. What's your take on that? And what should companies be offering in support to their employees at this time?
Well, I worry a little bit that some of it is window dressing. When folks say, okay, we got to do something now so that we can be seen as, we've got to respond in a way that paints us in a good picture or paints us in a good light. But that's very short-sighted. And if we think about our climate, our community, our business in a broader sense, we will do the things that are necessary to create the kind of climate that where everyone will be embraced and embrace the motto and the direction of the organization.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that you build a corporate structure that is inclusive, that embraces all. You don't have to worry about lowering standards to get diversity if your company is known as one that is open to all people, that affords everyone an opportunity.
Right.
Lowering standards is never the option,
right.
But creating a space that is inclusive should always be a central theme.
Absolutely.
Let me follow that, though, because there were two parts to that question. Another part is, what should we be doing?
Yes.
And I think first we need to figure out how to listen. We need to learn how to listen, and listen for understanding, and that is listen to one another in dialogue. If everyone feels heard, then I don't have to speak as much.
Right.
We don't have to have folks demonstrate in the streets when people are listening to the dialogue. In my world as a counselor, when we're listening to someone in a session, when they're talking a lot, it means I'm not hearing something. And when they get to the point where they can go, yeah, that means I've heard and I've been able to respond in a way that affirms that they know I heard them. We need to listen, and we need to learn how to listen effectively. We need to listen for clarity. Sometimes we listen and we listening while we're thinking of how we're going to respond, and that's detrimental, because what we're actually doing is not dialoguing. It's two people carrying on a monologue, and there's no connection in that. So listening and creating space for dialogue, and we say a lot of things around safe spaces and creating a safe space.
Right.
No one can guarantee a safe space. We can guarantee or encourage people to be brave within their space, and we can be open to hearing what it is that they need to express. So, and I'm saying a lot here, and I'm throwing a lot at you, but I think all of these things are important.
Yeah.
You know, encourage folks to be brave. Listen without interruption. Listen for clarity and listen for understanding. Don't promise safety that you can't guarantee. Don't be defensive. You know, there's a saying I heard on television somewhere, speak without offending, listen without defending. So if we can take the offensiveness out of our dialogue and take the defensiveness out of our dialogue. We want to be perfect, but that's not possible. We want to be seen as perfect. We want no one to ever see us as being biased in any way. And that's just not possible. Right. We're human beings, we're prone to it. And as you said, this kind of way of being has been around since the beginning of time. Bias and prejudice has been here from the beginning. Right. And it's going to take a lot for us. I mean, getting rid of it is a crazy notion. Managing it and accounting for it is something well within our grasp.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a fantastic response, and we're by no means saying that, you know, bias, racism, bigotry, that's going to be done away with 100%, you know, because as long as there are people in the world, there's going to be that percentage of people who have those ideals, no matter what people may say to them. But we're just saying, hey, we're calling attention to the issues, and at least hopefully, if at least one person grasps on and changes their mindset, then hey, we're saying that's a good job, because that one person can teach the other person. You know, they say each one teach one, right?
Indeed. Let me just add another notion there.
Yeah.
There's bias that is very obvious, and people wear it. You know, if you see me with a hood on and with swastikas on, you know, I'm telling you exactly who I am.
Right.
I would say that kind of bias, which announces itself, is bias you don't have to worry about much. The bias we really have to be challenged by is the one that is insidious, that is masked, that is unintentional even. You know, when I think I got it all together, but I'm doing damages in ways that I've never thought, that is dangerous. And we are all subject to commit that kind of error in our relationship with others. Right. I mean, I get told things because I'm in this business and I work with people who are very acute or very sharp at listening and understanding human relationships. And they'll call me in a minute on things that I do and say. And I've realized that this is not a destination that we arrive at, but one that we continue to work on constantly. And that's a frustrating notion, because we want to be able to say, I'm good and I got it. But there's no such person and there's no such location. It is a continual growth process that we engage in when we step into this world. And so we can put perfection out the door. And in fact, I heard one writer and commentarian on race say, when we believe we must be perfect to be good, that makes us averse to recognizing our own imperfections. Now, wow. That's paraphrase, but you know, the notion that we got to get it perfectly right, is crazy. But that's what we strive for. And we're afraid to make mistakes. So we don't want to talk about these things because we then feel like, well, gosh, I might get it wrong. I might say the offensive thing. I don't know which word to use. Are we still even using that term? What if that's the wrong term? Then it's going to make me look like I'm fill in the blank.
Right, right.
And so we let's just give up the notion of being perfect. I had a professor, a white man from Point, Mississippi, say to me, as I was a doc student, because I'm a doc student, I got it all together. I've got to demonstrate. I've got to teach. And he said, he pulls me aside and he says, let's you and I not pretend that we've not been touched by bias and racial notions that aren't just. Let's not pretend that we're not touched by that. The question is, how does our prejudice and biasness impact the people we're called to serve? Let's get past this notion of calling ourselves perfect and non-racist and that kind of thing. Let's own it and let's work on it. Well, first of all, I thought, did this white man from Point, Mississippi actually call me racist? But separate story. But it really helped me to sort of relax and say, who am I? What do I need to be doing? How can I grow? And help me recognize what I can't see in myself.
Right.
If we can do that, then we're going to put ourselves in a better position to create the kind of culture in our workspace that makes us a more effective, more profitable, happier place to work kind of organization.
Sure, absolutely. Well, speaking of that culture, in the workplace, what actions have you seen companies take that are the most effective in changing systemic racism?
Well, I think having the dialogues, having very specific, tailored dialogues where people are encouraged to speak and provided with as and I'm gonna get ready to use the phrase I just told you not to use, but creating a space that is safe enough for people to speak. Right. There are a lot of people right now losing jobs because of things that they've said and written, and many of them maybe should be. Yeah. But then that has the unintended effect of driving folks to be silent. I've even heard that in church. Well, the best thing for us to do is just not talk about this. Well, we got to get that kind of thinking out of our organizational way of being. We've got to be willing to allow folks to ask questions, create a space where dialogue can take place, have some goals about what we want to see happen, work specifically on those goals, and as much as we can, facilitate the dialogue, not run away from it, not pretend it doesn't exist, not take the notion where we're just one happy family and nobody here sees color, nobody here sees race, nobody here sees gender, nobody here sees national origin, nobody here sees any of those delineations that divide us into separate demographic groups. We need to see, recognize, and appreciate people in all the forms and shapes that they take. That requires some effort. That requires intentionality. That requires a willingness to step out and to be somewhat vulnerable. So this notion of having time and space for dialogue, having commitment to leaders that are willing to demonstrate a measure of vulnerability. Nobody's perfect. Nobody gets it right all the time. Admit, I don't know how to ask this question, but I'm curious. If we could say that, if we could say, I'm confused about. Right. And not make the other person some kind of I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but some kind of
Maybe maybe villainize them or put them down
not
for
villainize them,
yeah.
not to look at them as some kind of object under scientific inquiry, like new species or something
Yeah,
weird.
right.
Really not that different.
Right, right. I would say, working at Town Square, I would venture to say that, since I've been in this role, interacting with leadership and a lot of my colleagues, there has been opportunities for us to, share our ideas, and they've created that, open dialogue. And I like what you said there, like, hey, we have got to approach it that way, because if not, then that's going to basically decrease the culture, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
Having that open dialogue enhances the culture. Would you agree with that?
Indeed, indeed. And often it's not a salient issue for you because you're not the victim of it when it goes bad. Men walk around often going, I don't get the sexism thing. I don't get the sexism thing. Well, if you don't get the sexism thing, ask women about it.
Right.
They are well aware of it. They see it. It's a salient concern for them. And all you need to do is listen. The same thing is true about folks who are in the minority or in the underrepresented categories within any organization. Ask the question.
Yeah.
Listen to the response, and accept that response as that individual's truth. There's no one size fits all. We're all different. We all bring something different to the table. And so we really have to be careful in our listening that we listen thoroughly, I guess is a way to say it.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, not only listening, but taking thoughtful and action as well. Added on to that, want to talk about today. Everybody knows, as I mentioned before, what today is. It's Juneteenth. A lot of buzz going on about this day, especially the significance of it. But can you talk to us maybe about the significance of Juneteenth and what it might mean to you?
This is an evolving kind of notion. I grew up at a time and a place where there was not a whole lot of attention on Juneteenth. I would hear older people talk about Juneteenth. Again, I grew up in South Carolina, and for lots of reasons, Juneteenth was not a big deal. Then I went to Texas, and I did my doctoral studies in Texas. Juneteenth in Texas, for obvious reasons, is a very big thing. Oh, yeah. And I thought, what is okay? This is this thing I've been hearing about, but not really hearing about. I think it's important for us to take just a minute to think about the history of Juneteenth. Now, Juneteenth, it was actually, okay, the Emancipation Proclamation came into effect in 1863, January 1st, 1863. Juneteenth came around in June of 1865.
Right.
And that was when a major general from the U.S. Military came to Galveston, Texas, to let everybody know that in fact slavery had ended. Now that's 2.5 years after slavery had ended.
Yeah.
What took them? Why, and there are lots of stories about why that happened, and the historians don't agree on that. And I'm not a historian, so I'm not going to get too much into that. But some folks say, well, they meant the Union wanted to give the Southerners 1 or 2 more cotton harvests. Some say the messenger carrying the message was murdered. There are a number of different stories about why that occurred. But June 10th was when the message actually received, and I said June 10th, but Juneteenth, the 19th of June, was when the message was actually delivered. And really, some see it as sort of anticlimactic because the notion was, okay, you're free, you're no longer enslaved, let's go back to work. I mean, and because the situation didn't change much for folks who were the laborers thereafter.
Right.
You went from sharecropping or from slavery to sharecropping. And I heard one historian say that trickery and maltreatment was not the exception to the rule in sharecropping. It was the rule. Right. And so, you know, the pattern of mistreatment of folks continued. But Juneteenth was that time when legally folks were notified that the Emancipation Proclamation did in fact release folks from bondage.
Right. Okay. Okay. And oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me say this: in Texas, Juneteenth is a holiday. It has been since 1980, or right. Don't quote me on that, but I think about 1980.
Yes.
And it's for that notion is permeated, and we've seen some expansion of that, and everybody wants a holiday.
Don't they? Don't they?
You know, and it commemorates something important, even bigger than just the release from bondage.
Right.
But it commemorates an appreciation of self, an appreciation of culture. It commemorates much more for folks than just, you know, the origin of the unofficial holiday.
Right.
And so it's more salient to some people than to others. And you'll hear folks who are really embracing the notion, and then you'll see folks who are less familiar with it.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've seen a broad push, right? A large push for that not only be state holidays. I know that 27 states, if I'm not mistaken, observe it as a state holiday. But now there's even a push for it to be a national holiday. Now the question has come about ever since that push has been made. Well, can you say that slavery wasn't a bad thing if you're going to recognize Juneteenth as a national holiday? Like, what do you think about that? Because of course we have people who think who had that ideal, who had those ideals, like, well, it wasn't all that bad and all that, but if making it a national holiday, if we make it a national holiday, would you have to change your thinking to saying, well, you know, it was something that was bad, for lack of a better term?
There are parts of our history that are unfortunate, and we don't do a good job of teaching young people history. We don't trust their ability to be critical consumers of information, and by that I mean we teach middle and high school history and civics as a kind of indoctrination lesson where everything is rosy. And then they get to college and they meet these professors who are, you know, giving them this information, and they're sitting kind of with their mouths agape going, that really happened? Yeah, that really happened. We need to work toward being better consumers of our history and better understanders of our history, and not bleach it to be something that it's not.
Right.
You know, and so we have work to do around that. And we can start by being a little bit more honest with each other and with our kids in instructing them around history. You know, we got work to do in that regard.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. It starts with education, you know. And really in the home, it's so important for people to have that foundation, so that they know how to approach, people in the world. So I want to ask you this and follow up to that.
Mhm.
What can people do to better understand the issues plaguing the Black community?
I keep talking about talking and dialogue, dialogue, and education, and I mean educate, and I'm not talking about going back for another degree. I'm talking about reading.
Yes.
I'm talking about sharing. I'm talking about even watching popular movies, incorporating documentaries. Now, you have to be careful because Hollywood puts a spin on things, and sometimes they throw a little yeast on something to make it bigger than it was. So we have to be careful about that. But if we, some of Selma, the movie, 12 Years a Slave, the movie, another one that 13th, the documentary. All of those give us insights that sometimes contrast with the things that we've been taught.
Right, right, absolutely. And I mean, we've seen a lot of documentaries being pushed on these streaming networks such as Netflix, and so the materials are out there, the resources are out there. It is just about making the step, to want to learn. You got to have that mindset, right? To want to understand what's going on outside of yourself, really, because not everybody has the same experience as you do. And so, if you have that, if you understand what's going on in the Black community in particularly, then I would venture to say that you'll be more able to empathize with them.
Well, and empathy, I think, is more than an emotional way of being. Empathy is a conscious effort to take someone else's perspective, to see the world through their eyes. Only then can you begin to be empathic. I can't sit and throw sympathy at you. Yeah, I feel sorry for you. No, I need to look into the world from your perspective, right, and try to understand your view. That expands my way of thinking. I don't have to agree with you, but I do need to understand what it means to be you.
Right.
And that notion of perspective taking, we are not good at it. We see the world from our vantage point, and that's all we ever embrace often. But when we learn to look at things, as the Native American proverb suggests, walking, 2 miles in the moccasins of another, then we really are in a position to understand and be empathic. But we've got to learn how to take the perspective of others, and that's across lines. That, I mean, everyone has to be able to do that with everyone else. Then we can understand, oh, I see why you're afraid. Oh, I see why you responded in the way that you did. Right. I can understand. Let me give you some more information that might be helpful, rather than just the response of, I saw that and I didn't like it, and therefore,
Right. Yeah. Perspective is everything. I completely agree with you. It is really what we should all be striving to do. Now, in regards to the education piece that we were just talking about, I just wanted to drop a quick plug in for everybody. We will be sharing some educational resources for everyone's after this event, so be on the lookout for that. And I hope that you all will be able to just take some time out of your day and listen and read some podcasts that we'll be sharing, and maybe some books shared that will be shared as well. Just take some time out to gain more perspective. But the last question that I have before we wrap up and open it up to the Q&A session, Dr. Abrams, if employees can take one thing away from our discussion today, what would you want it to be?
One thing.
Hey, man, it could be a couple. I know it's hard, but
give me two things. Give me two things.
I'll give you two.
I think we need to understand how bridging the cultural chasm builds, augments, strengthens our brand as opposed to taking away from it. That's one thing. The second thing is that doing this work will require some time. It will require some effort. It will require us being and learning how to be vulnerable for the greater good of everybody around us. It does take work, but it gets easier as we learn how to engage in it, and it pays off when we want to be heard, when we want to be understood, when we want our business to do well.
Absolutely.
There's a payoff.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it even better myself. And I mean, that's why you're the professor. I really appreciate your time.
That's why I'm the professor.
I really appreciate your perspective and what you have brought to the table in just all your years of education, and I know that here at the Town Square family it has appreciated this conversation, but we're not done with it yet.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna open it up a Q&A session. So I'm thinking, Emily, if you want to go ahead and open that open up that portal. But
we're open, and we've already got a few questions in, so we'll go ahead and jump into that before we close everything out today. So the first question that came in, Dr. Abrams, is what was the line that you said about speaking without offending and listening ? So I think you used the quote there.
Speaking or speak without offending and listen without defending. So, the notion of speaking and listening without defending, that is, don't assume malintent on the other person's part, and don't speak in a manner to be offensive. That actually came from like a Montel Williams show I saw.
Oh, Montel, that's old school, man.
Yeah. I go back.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one we have here, you talked about how we address things because they're right in our face right now. When social media dies down and the protests occur less, how can we keep this importance level going and get better?
I think if we actually make a concerted effort to address, when it becomes a part of our way of doing business, and I mean, not just about issues around race, but issues around gender, issues around national origin, issues around regionality. Y'all are a big company. Do y'all treat the people from the South differently? I need to know that. I might take offense. No, but regionality is a big deal. All of the delineations that, and we automatically separate ourselves into these constituent groups, and we do it on the playground. We did it in the nursery. We do, we have to challenge that. And we need to create a system that reminds us to continually be aware of that. And you invite and turn up the volume on the voices that are often not heard. and you create space for them to have a seat at the table as well. And so it's really about being intentional, I think, to create that kind of space, to afford everyone an opportunity to be heard and to continue being heard. Our hope is that it becomes less necessary, but that only happens when our caring is intentionalized.
Oh, absolutely.
So right now there are a lot of posts about where to donate, where not to donate. Are there specific organizations, in your opinion, that will make a bigger difference that you would like to support?
You know what, my wish, it has less to do with financial engagement and more to do with personal engagement. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
How are you committed to engaging in notions of justice? That's a bigger concern. Right now, much of what we're seeing is being driven by the notion that justice is being embraced by a multicultural group of people. You know, when suburban housewives are out in the street with their children, demanding action and demanding justice for people who don't look like them, that's noticed. And so engagement and dialogue, to me, is bigger than the money that one can give. And you know, I don't know. I do know that there are lots of organizations that don't do a good job of managing money. That is, you know, they have tremendous overhead, and what we give actually doesn't trickle down into the subject of our giving. So I would say, and I would encourage, investigate the history of organizations and ask the question, how have they managed funding up to this point? But I don't have a list that I can give you. But I think what's bigger is how do we give our time?
Absolutely. So one of the questions that's come in is, what seems to be different about the Black Lives Matter movement now in comparison to some of the previous ones we've seen?
Nothing. It's seen differently. You know, a few years ago, Colin Kaepernick was the devil incarnate, live, walking around. Now he's seen sort of as he figured it out before everyone else. How we think about like Black Lives matters as a movement. Well, Black lives do matter. And you know what? All lives matter too. Those are not mutually exclusive. But right now, Black lives are having a tough time in cities across America. Let's attend to that. But let's not assume that everybody else's lives doesn't matter either. So indeed, let's embrace the notion that Black lives matter.
Right.
So this one says, this work will take a long time. Is there a vision that you have for the end of 2020 when you would say the current movement is headed in the right direction?
It will take a long time. But as we've seen in this past couple of weeks, often there can be events that propel us quickly along our way. And so we, even as, you know, we talk about the moral arc of the universe, and that Dr. King spoke of, tending and trending toward justice, yes, but sometimes justice can develop a quick step. And so what I would suggest is, yeah, it will take time. And it will be a slow and deliberate process to change hearts and minds, or to expand our hearts and minds. We just need to be committed to the long haul. And if we work hard, we will have those times and those opportunities to pick up a few steps here and there. But we didn't get here overnight, and we won't get away from this overnight. There will be, again, some major steps forward from time to time, but we're going to have to work. We're going to have to put this into our systematic way of being.
Okay, we're going to answer one more question back here and then turn it back over to Tim. So the last question I have here for you is there anything that I can do to help those who do not believe the U.S. has a racism problem as is?
You know, I teach multicultural counseling, and often folks will come into that class with the notion of, I'm going to learn what I need to learn, respond, and then be done with this, because I don't buy it anyway. And then they buy it because they see it up close. And then one guy in particular I'm thinking about said, I need to figure out how to communicate this. And he said, I just need numbers. My family, my community is all about numbers. Well, CNN did a story on their website that said 5 graphs that explains racism, and I think you can probably go and find it. But it looks at wealth inequality. It looks at police inequality, or policing, inequality in policing and justice. And it looked at a couple of other things. And when you look at those things, the question is, how do we get there? Well, in the story, they point to the systemic things that propelled us to get to those inequities. And so that was something that was helpful for folks. I mean, when you see it in black and white, and then you have to say, well, how did this happen? And then when you dig into it, and not that, well, these people were lazy. No, these people could not get home loans, so they couldn't build wealth. And most of our wealth in America is built on home ownership and transferring that ownership generationally, and then investing. And, you know, it builds from something, as we say, simple as home ownership. But it's really not that complex. Looking at the numbers, looking at and that graph, those graphs from CNN that look at general inequality, they begin to tell the story, and you have to ask yourself, look behind those numbers. Mm-hmm. How do we get behind those numbers?
Absolutely. All right, well, I'm going to kick it over to Tim for some closing remarks. Thank you so much, Dr. Abrams and Dean, for your amazing conversation and dialogue. Tim, we'll let you take it over here.
Wow. I'm touched, to be honest with you. I personally took a lot away from the dialogue and the discussion. I'm impressed with the level of questions that are coming from our staff and the desire to learn. Dr. Abrams, I thank you so much, and Dean, for really, moderating a discussion that can really open up some hearts and minds and give people some guidance during times like this. Our CEO, Bill Wilson, wanted me to make sure that he had his remarks heard. Unfortunately, today is our board meeting, and those board meetings are scheduled pretty far in advance. So the coordinating of all the schedules of all the high power people in that room, it was impossible for him to move. But he did want to thank everybody that took part in this, including myself, Dean, Heather, the IT team, Emily, for organizing the important event. And as well, he wanted to thank Dr. Abrams for joining and educating our staff. His words are basically, I'm sure this will be the first of many events and discussions that focus on the importance of diversity and inclusion. And I hope that people are leaving work today with greater understanding. Communication and education are the foundation of inclusion and acceptance. I also look forward to continuing the dialogue and ensuring that Town Square is a place where everyone feels that the skills and expertise they bring are welcome and wanted, regardless of your race, age, gender, sexual orientation, and so forth. Thank you again, and he wanted to wish everybody a marvelous day. I think that's a great stopping point, guys. I look forward to future events similar to this, and